Thanks so much, Rachel. Thank you for having me. I'll start by saying, when I was 8, my friends and I talked about what we wanted to do when we grew up. And our ambitions varied from athletics and zookeeping to flying to the moon. And as we mapped our undetailed lives, I realized that my own ambitions were a little peculiar, because I wanted to devote my life to finding the world's most extraordinary plants. Pathless Forest is the story of a botanist who was drawn to the other side of the globe by invisible threads, something that made him recklessly bold, uncharacteristically bold. Like Apollo, he dared and was driven to extremes by an unrequited love. And the more he chased this flower, the more he was rejected by it, and was driven mad and dragged to heaven through hell and back. In his obsession, he was driven half sick to find this flower. But so it was that I followed tribes down into the abyss to find Rafflesia's hidden flowers, and dripped blood, sweat, and tears on them, and felt my life change forever. And this is the story of a botanist, a flower, and a forester, and how our lives intertwined. This, I don't know if you can see at the back, but I'll describe it for you. It's a lumpy, floppy, great pentagon of a flower. It's a picture I took from an old book that, as a child, I would sit cross-legged on my bed and stare at. The book told me it's the largest flower in the world, found only in the jungles of the Far East, and it spans a metre across. It's a parasitic plant. It has no leaves or chlorophyll and spends most of its life inside a vine, erupting only to flower. This was Rafflesia, the largest flower in the world, and back then it cast its spell on me, and I had to find it. And today I'm a botanist. I work at the University of Oxford Botanic Garden, and my work takes me all around the world in pursuit of plants. It takes me to places where no one goes, the most remote wildernesses you can possibly imagine, places less trodden than the moon. And as you kindly said in your introduction, I'm an illustrator and an artist as well. So when I see an extraordinary work of nature, a beautiful plant in its habitat, for me it feels electric. It's the closest thing to electricity. And I feel that I hold on to that electrical energy and then sort of transform it into colour through brush, and then conjure those magic experiences that I've had with plants and with people in a more sort of meditative way through art. And the medium I use varies with the subject. So it might be through oils, such as the pitcher plant on the left and the montage in the middle, or for capturing people and portraits, I tend to use graphite and pencil. But for me, I'm a scientist, but by being an artist, this is another way for me to make sense of the world around me. This is my illustration of a very talented young botanist in the Philippines, Adrian Tobias. And I should say at this point that the people that I'm going to introduce in this short talk, really they are the heroes of this story. Adrian joined me on all of these adventures, and he introduced me to what you may be able to see at the bottom of my illustration, which is the world's smallest, largest flower, if you will. There are 40 or so species of Rafflesia, and the smallest of them grow to about the size of a stretched hand, and that's this one, Rafflesia panchuana, which grows on Mount Makiling in the Philippines. It's a remarkable thing. It looks like one of Ernst Haeckel's creatures, or maybe a work of Escher, in that I'll describe it for you. It's blood red and covered in a constellation of these sort of white atoms that fall and fade in contours and over the edge of the flower, such that it's very hard to get a grasp of the true scale of the thing. And Rafflesia, as I said, it has no leaves, and it pushes these strange flowers up through the leafy viscera, through the surface of the forest. We spent a beautiful moment or two quietly with this flower, whilst millions of people went about their lives around us, up on this mountain, just staring at this very beautiful work of nature. It's very special. I should say at this point that most Rafflesia adventures end in failure. Rafflesia is, well, there are one or two species that are quite easy to find. Most are very difficult, and some are damned difficult, and you have to half kill yourself to try and find them, and that's, that's what I've done. But this painting here captures one such aborted mission where we were on a particularly difficult trek, and we wanted to find this rare species. And I remember it was quite arduous. The terrain was tough. We were literally swinging from vines. We do that to cross some of the most difficult terrain. And then we reached this sort of outpouring of vines in the forest, like a great hydrothermal vent. And a couple of meters up off the ground was this bud the size of a football sort of lurking there, Rafflesia buds. A bud, not a flower. And that's the risk with a Rafflesia adventure. They take 9 months to mature and they only open for a few days. So the chances are you won't find it. But it's a horrible, disappointing feeling. It feels like falling. And on realizing that we hadn't found it, we sent 5 foresters up the slope to look for it. 4 dogs followed them, and 3 botanists watched their mission disintegrate as one bud laughed at them. And I think this bud smirks. I do think that. But the forest gave us a conciliatory gift, a peace offering. This is a jade vine, but not the one that you see growing here, beautiful though that is. This is a different species. It's not in cultivation. And we were walking through the forest, and we saw these flowers the shape of doves, an impossible shade of blue, spangling the floor. And we looked up, and then we saw blue reflected in one another's eyes. And up above us were these great orbs of blue blossom, like chandeliers. And it was just an extraordinary experience to see something so beautiful, sublime. It was very hard to reach because they were about the same height as that small window up there, so several meters above my head. But I had to see it because I swear it's the most beautiful thing I've seen. So I climbed into a tree and slithered along the branch and managed to bring one towards me. And it was like holding a fragile bird. And like all birds, it fled, and I let go. And it almost left a trail of blue in its wake. And then as I let go, I fell out the tree. And then I had a bruise on the side of my hip that was an equally impressive shade of blue for about 3 months. I hope you can see these men. I'd like to introduce the Banau Indigenous community, a tribe with whom I stayed in Kalinga. And it's difficult for me to express how grateful I am to these people who were kind and gentle and took me into their forest. It was a place I was told no Westerner had ever been before, and I was very privileged to go there. It was hell. It was so difficult, I can't describe. It was a leech-ridden, infested place that these guys had to machete a tunnel through ferns that we had to drag ourselves through, and it half killed me. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that for weeks afterwards, trees tormented me in my sleep, in my dreams after this place. But they took me and showed me something that changed my life. This is Rafflesia banawana. It's an enormous flower, and we came across a whole slope of them unfurling. I think every life has an apogee, that moment that all moments lead into and flow out from. We, as if we were in space, sort of walked, it felt, in slow motion to the flower, and then as if we'd rehearsed it, found our place around it, and then in the green lamp of the forest, just sat quietly staring at it. And I can attest that a flower can honestly bring a man to tears. And I remember sitting there, sort of blinking the flower back into focus. I think because it was so hard, this passage of pain to get to something so remarkable. But remarkable it was. And sometimes, I find myself reliving that adventure and summoning this flower in my thoughts, retracing my steps to it. And like a dream, it's pure, only the memory is diamond sharp. And this is the tribe with their flower. And I was so happy that a copy of this illustration was sent to the tribe and given to them. But I know time is precious tonight, so I'm going to move us swiftly on to Indonesia and to introduce you to a wizard called Mr. Nagatari. He's the only man in the world who's repeatedly propagated Rafflesia with success in Bogor Botanic Garden. It's not grown outside of Southeast Asia, not to be confused with a Titanarum. And this man has learnt how to graft Rafflesia from one vine and tempt it onto another. So he takes a bit of possessed vine and coaxes Rafflesia into another uninfected vine. And he gave my colleagues from the Philippines and me a private workshop on how to grow Rafflesia. And in a moment, I'll explain why. Now meet Deki, the man on the left. Decky's an old friend of mine now, really. He's WhatsApped me for years, and he was very keen that I should come and visit him in Sumatra, and I wasn't altogether clear why. He doesn't speak any English. These are his friends, and this is his special flower, Rafflesia kamumu. This is Decky again on the left with a bud of Rafflesia arnoldii, the largest flower in the world, the single species with the largest flower spanning a metre. And then on the right is an example of an open flower that we found. It's like a mythological creature, some kind of dragon or something. You know, we walked through the rainforest past millipedes the size of snakes and things that look like woodlice the size of tennis balls that just roll in front of you, and deadly snakes that I must say Decky was stowing underneath my seat in our vehicle without me knowing. And then we came to this extraordinary work of nature. It's just magical. It had a mouthful of fangs and 5 leathern wings that were sort of reclined on the forest floor, poised as if ready to take to flight. I say he because it is a male flower. These flowers are either male or female, and we sexed it, and it's a male. It was an extraordinary thing, and it really sort of makes you feel that you're losing your mind. And this was often the case from my experience in this very difficult terrain, taken out of my comfortable life and put into these challenging conditions, and then seeing flowers the size of people rearing up out of the forest in front of you. You know, I felt like Alice in Wonderland. The last species of Rafflesia in this presentation is this one, Rafflesia benculuensis. And I think for me, in some ways, it's the most special. It's exceptionally rare, and I think rather few people have seen it, and we didn't expect to. I'm quite lucky like this. I have a gift. I managed to bring these flowers out of the earth when I visit, and so we managed to find 2 on this particular trip. It's an extraordinary thing. It's like no other flower I've seen. It's a sort of pale vision that's sort of brought up from the depths of the forest, has come up from the underworld like an exorcism of the forest. It's an unearthly pale, like a negative image of itself, and in the uncertain light of the forest it almost looked blue, as if it had been glanced at by the moon. And we sat there looking at it, and in the background, you can't see in my illustrations, Decky was sort of marshalling us towards this flower, as you might family members to see a newborn baby. And then this is Yogi, a custodian of Rafflesia on the left, and that's Dang Zul, a village leader, who took us to see his special flower. And he knelt and just looked at it lovingly like a father. And it was such a strange experience to have this sort of group of men, some of them quite strong-looking, all of us sort of fawning over this flower. And there was something, in a way, unusual about it, but actually not. It didn't feel that way. But this day, I felt that we baited probability. The odds were against us in finding this flower for nature to deliver her promise. But we did. And I think this flower needed to be seen because just 20 or so meters from one of these flowers, the rainforest had just been burnt and razed to the ground to make way for crops, for a hungry, ever-growing human population wanting more. And this was the reality that I came across again and again. And the other sad reality is that we found populations where people had deliberately destroyed Rafflesia, which is rather hard to make sense of. I think it's the case that smallholder farmers sometimes fear having something so precious on their site because in a way it devalues the land for them, because it's easier to make money from a cash crop to grow in this area of land than it would be to, however much I might will it to be different, to get revenue from ecotourism for a flower like this. It's a very complex, very multifaceted problem. And as a visitor to this world, I tried very hard not to be judgmental about that, but to work with community heroes such as these guys here who are doing so much to protect Rafflesia in its natural habitat and to protect this precious flower because it's a flower in peril. This is the last slide. So I mentioned to you that I had that magical workshop in Indonesia in Bogor from Mr. Nagatari, the little wizard, who taught us his skills for Rafflesia propagation. Well, we took that knowledge back to the Philippines, where there are 15 species of Rafflesia, and they are nearly all threatened with extinction there. And we, with special permission, took an infected piece of host vine that with its precious cargo of Rafflesia. And I describe in the book that I slept with this by my pillow, by my bed, and that's no exaggeration, I did. It's the most precious thing I've ever had in my possession. And then we got up at dawn, and the next day we took this piece of vine to an area of protected rainforest, and learning the skills that we picked up in Indonesia, we grafted it, propagated it onto an uninfected vine, and then we wait. It takes 3 years to know if Rafflesia is in residence, if our graft has taken. We know that the vine has survived the graft, so there's every reason to believe that it has. Now, one graft's not going to save all the Rafflesia species, but it is a blueprint for conservation. It's a template that we can apply elsewhere. So where there are populations of Rafflesia in peril, this is another tool in our toolkit for protecting a plant that can't be grown in botanic gardens around the world because its seeds can't be banked and it's so difficult to grow. And so together with my colleagues, that's something that I feel truly proud that we've managed to achieve. And so you can see, I said at the beginning of this talk that Rafflesia pulled me across the globe by invisible threads, but it did it with some purpose, I think. I'll leave it there. Thank you.